core thing.
To the core of what this Rolling Thunder thing is all about. And I don't have a clue, because it's about nothing. It's just something that happened 40 years ago.
Today, Bob Dylan finally exposes the biggest jerks of the 60s folk scene. Forget the romantic image. Greenwich Village was no paradise, it was a pit. Smoky cafes reeked of ego and jealousy, singers guarded stages like attack dogs, and betrayal was the rule. Dylan, the scrappy kid from Minnesota, crashed their party and refused to bow. In those basements, rivalries didn't just simmer, they blew up, turning the so-called folk family into a nasty cage fight of ambition and spite. The 60s folk world looked like a brotherhood from the outside, but inside it was riddled with resentment. Dylan's rapid rise sparked bitterness. Established figures like Dave Van Ronk saw him as an opportunist, while others whispered that Dylan was too ambitious, too cunning, and too quick to borrow influences without giving credit. Joan Baez, at first his champion and lover, later accused him of betrayal both on stage and in private life. These rivalries were not only professional, but deeply personal, tangled with love triangles, backstage politics, and power struggles. The pure folk image was nothing but a mask. Behind it were human flaws, betrayals, and simmering anger. Think of the love feuds that shook Dylan's circle, relationships where personal and artistic lives collided, where harmony turned into bitterness overnight. Dylan's romance with Joan Baez began as a luminous musical partnership, their voices blending in perfect unison. But beneath the beauty lay fault lines. She wanted to remain the queen of folk purity, committed to causes and tradition, while Dylan's restless spirit pulled him toward rock and poetic experimentation. Their breakup was not just a personal tragedy, but a symbolic clash of two visions of music, the idealistic folk queen against the defiant prophet of change. The stage that once united them became a battlefield, each song tinged with longing and resentment. Meanwhile, Dylan's encounters with women in the village often left behind scars, whispers, and bitterness. In smoky apartments and crowded clubs, affairs overlapped and loyalties broke down. Lovers became rivals, and friends turned into adversaries as passion spilled into betrayal. Love triangles among musicians, poets, and activists created a web of broken hearts, fueling further conflict within the scene. The village, outwardly a haven of creativity, became a labyrinth of jealousy and revenge, where every stolen glance or whispered rumor added another layer of drama to Dylan's already turbulent life. The Newport Folk Festival of 1965 is remembered as the night Dylan went electric. But the booze, the fury, and the betrayal cut much deeper than a single performance. The audience that once embraced him now erupted in shock. Folk traditionalists branded him a sellout, a traitor to the cause, their voices rising in a chorus of disapproval that echoed across the festival grounds.
Let's go.
All right, let's go.
I don't remember a thing about Rolling Thunder.
Okay.
I mean, it happened so long ago, I wasn't even born. You know. So what do you want to know?
For some, it was as though Dylan had ripped the heart out of their movement, replacing purity with noise and rebellion. Pete Seeger, once a supporter, was rumored to be outraged by Dylan's defiance, even threatening to cut the cables if it would silence the blaring amplifiers. Rival musicians sneered that he had abandoned authenticity for fame, whispering in tents and backstage corners that Dylan had betrayed not just them, but the very soul of folk itself. For Dylan, the electric guitar symbolized freedom, raw, unapologetic, and liberating. Yet for many in the folk world, it was the ultimate insult, a declaration that their ideals were outdated and irrelevant. The clash was more than musical, it was ideological, a generational rift between tradition and revolution. That night marked a fracture that would never fully heal, casting Dylan against some of the biggest names in folk who saw him as arrogant and unfaithful to the movement. Newport was no mere concert, it was a battlefield, and Dylan walked away both condemned and immortalized, forever altered by the storm he had unleashed. The list of Dylan's conflicts only grew as his fame soared, and with every triumph came another fracture. Ramblin' Jack Elliott, once a companion on stage, resented his meteoric success, muttering that Dylan had stolen the spotlight that rightfully belonged to the old guard. Phil Oakes, a fiery activist and songwriter, was left humiliated by Dylan's sharp tongue and relentless criticism, reduced to tears after one cutting dismissal. Tom Paxton, though once friendly, accused him of abandoning folk ideals, condemning him for choosing electricity and poetry over purity and tradition. Even within the counterculture, Dylan's unpredictable moods and ruthless honesty left enemies in his wake. Singers whispered that he was impossible to trust, that one moment he would share a stage with them, and the next he would mock their art in front of others. Some felt betrayed that he refused to become the voice of a generation on their terms, walking away from causes and protests when the world expected him to lead. Others envied his global fame and cutting-edge artistry, their admiration curdling into bitterness as Dylan outpaced them in influence and legend. The feuds went beyond disagreements. They cut like open wounds. Friendships that began in smoke-filled cafes ended with angry confrontations in dressing rooms. Former allies spat accusations across the press, and Dylan often gave as good as he got, fueling headlines that painted him both as genius and villain. Wherever Dylan went, admiration mixed with hostility, and camaraderie collapsed into rivalry. In this battlefield of guitars and ideals, Dylan stood alone, bloodied by words but strengthened by defiance, his art sharpened by every enemy who tried to bring him down. Behind the public image, Dylan was carrying his own weight of personal problems. Fame magnified everything: his troubled love life, his strained family ties, and his struggle to live under the constant spotlight. His marriage to Sarah Lowndes was marked by infidelity, distance, and pressure, unraveling under the demands of touring and the chaos of his inner circle. There were fights behind closed doors, moments of silence that lasted for days, and letters left unanswered as Dylan buried himself in work or vanished into solitude. His children grew up in the shadows of scandals, their father often absent and emotionally distant, their lives disrupted by his endless tours and sudden disappearances. Dylan's health also faltered after his 1966 motorcycle crash, a mysterious event shrouded in secrecy and speculation. Some believed it was a genuine accident, others whispered it was a cover for a breakdown caused by drugs, exhaustion, and paranoia. He withdrew from the spotlight for months, hiding away in Woodstock, where the walls of seclusion both protected him and deepened his fears. Friends who visited recalled a man haunted by demons, his creativity tangled with anxiety and suspicion, a genius wrestling with fragility. As the years moved on, the pressures of fame became heavier. Rumors of drug use followed him from city to city, adding weight to the myth of a man spiraling between brilliance and collapse. His inner circle fractured under the strain. Managers fought with bandmates, lovers fought with each other, and Dylan stood at the center, unable to escape the chaos of his own making. The very man who seemed untouchable was battling demons far from the stage, fighting for balance in a life that offered him everything yet demanded more than any one person could endure. Everywhere Dylan went, scandal followed, and the shadows of controversy seemed to chase him like a second skin. He clashed with journalists, sometimes mocking them outright, sometimes walking away mid-question, leaving behind bewildered rooms and headlines that painted him as arrogant. Press conferences became arenas of conflict, with Dylan wielding sarcasm like a weapon. He was accused of arrogance, of cruelty, of playing mind games with both lovers and rivals. In hotel rooms and backstage corridors, his unpredictable moods left even close companions walking on eggshells. Rumors about heavy drug use circulated in hushed tones, adding to the image of a restless, volatile genius spiraling into dangerous excess. Stories of late-night binges, of whispered paranoia, and of creative breakdowns spread quickly, feeding the gossip that Dylan thrived on chaos. His sharp tongue cut down colleagues, turning friends into foes. Phil Oakes left humiliated after an argument, others burned by Dylan's ruthless honesty in moments of anger. For many in the folk and rock world, being close to him meant risking betrayal, for his trust was fleeting and his patience thin. And in private life, the scandals multiplied. Affairs and betrayals stained his reputation, leaving behind partners who spoke of his distance and unpredictability. His marriage became a battlefield of suspicion and secrecy, while stories of romantic entanglements with singers and muses swirled around him. Dylan's private struggles, his inability to balance fame with intimacy, his restlessness that destroyed stability, fueled gossip columns and whispered conversations in smoky bars from New York to London. For many, Dylan was as difficult as he was brilliant, a man who built bridges with his music yet burned them in life as quickly as they were made. He seemed to embody contradiction itself, genius and self-destruction, earnest and cruelty, charisma and hostility. The scandals and shadows were not side notes in his story, but central forces that shaped the myth. Each rumor, each betrayal, each broken friendship added to the aura of danger surrounding him, making Dylan both feared and revered in equal measure. Looking back, Dylan's journey through the 60s folk scene was less about unity and more about survival. He rose through jealousy, betrayal, and bitterness, carving his legacy while surrounded by enemies and skeptics. The so-called community of folk singers was in truth a battlefield of egos and ideals, where Dylan often stood alone. Yet out of these conflicts, scandals, and broken relationships, he forged some of the greatest music of the 20th century. But the final picture is not a simple one. Imagine Dylan standing at the crossroads of his own legend, aware that every friendship turned rivalry had left scars. The bitterness of others did not destroy him, it hardened him. Each betrayal became fuel for songs that reshaped not only folk, but the entire music industry. Behind every lyric was a memory of conflict, of arguments in smoke-filled apartments, of lovers turned enemies, of critics who laughed before being silenced by his genius. In truth, Dylan's survival was an act of defiance. The so-called jerks of the folk scene tried to hold him down, but their own pettiness revealed them more than it harmed him. What endured was Dylan himself, scarred, complicated, but more powerful for every struggle he endured. The myth of the untouchable icon was not built on harmony, but on chaos, on a battlefield where Dylan walked away wounded, yet victorious, leaving behind music that could not be erased. This was the paradox of Dylan's life in the 60s. The conflicts and scandals that threatened to undo him became the very forces that crowned him. And as the years passed, the jealousies and betrayals faded, but the songs remained. In the end, the folk scene was never a family. It was a war. And Dylan, for all his flaws and demons, was the one who survived to tell the tale.